This story is titled, Stepdaughter Said That I'm Not Her Real Mom and Shouldn't Tell Her What to Do. You're nothing to me. You're a nobody. So when it came time to pay for college, I told her to let her real mother pay for her tuition. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey, Reddit. So here's my story. I don't know why I stayed so long or why I let things get so bad, but looking back now, it feels like I was blind to all the red flags. My name's Lauren. I'm 46, and I own a bakery in Philadelphia. It's my pride and joy, something I built up from scratch with a lot of sweat and long nights. It's small, but successful, and I've always worked hard to make it a welcoming spot for the neighborhood. About 7 years ago, I met Greg. He was this contractor I hired to renovate the bakery when I was trying to expand. Right from the start, he had this way of making you feel like you could trust him. He wasn't bad looking either. Tall, dark hair, nice smile. He'd always take the time to chat with me when he was on a break, telling me about his life. He had this way of making it sound like he'd been through a lot, but was working hard to overcome it, you know? He talked about his daughter, Chloe, who was 11 at the time. He said she was his whole world, and that he'd been raising her on his own after his ex-wife, Nina, lost custody. According to him, Nina was irresponsible and caused a lot of chaos in their lives. So Greg had stepped up as the solid parent. He made it sound like he was some kind of superhero dad. And honestly, I ate it up. I thought, wow, what a good guy, taking care of his kid like that. Within a year, we were talking about marriage. Greg had this way of making everything sound like we were building a life together. He'd say things like, Chloe and I would love to have a real family again. And I guess I let myself believe that I could give them that. It wasn't just about Greg. It was Chloe too. She was shy at first, but sweet in her own way. I wanted to give her a stable, happy home, something I didn't really have growing up. So, we got married. Greg and Chloe moved into my house, which was bigger and closer to better schools for her. At first, it was great. We did family dinners, game nights, and weekend outings. Chloe seemed to be warming up to me. And Greg? Well, he seemed perfect. He'd help around the house, tell me how much he appreciated me, and remind me that we were building a future together. But looking back, the cracks started showing pretty early on. 4 years after we got married, Greg told me he was leaving his contracting job. He said the management was toxic and that he couldn't stand the way they treated him. I was sympathetic at first. I mean, everyone deserves to work somewhere they feel respected, right? He said he just needed a little time to figure out his next step, and I didn't question it. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed to be adjusting well to her new school and neighborhood. She was making friends, joining clubs, and even started talking about college plans. One day, she came home from school and said she needed a $200 calculator for some advanced math class. I told her I'd look into it, but before I could even finish the sentence, she snapped, "What's there to look into? I need it." Greg, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, chimed in with, "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's for school." Like, excuse me? I'm already paying for everything, and you're just going to sit there and tell me what to do with my money? I should have said something then. I should have set boundaries, but I didn't. I wanted to keep the peace. I told myself, this is what families do. You support each other. So I bought the damn calculator and pretended it didn't bother me. But deep down, I was starting to feel like I was being taken advantage of. The thing that really got to me was how Greg talked about our future while doing absolutely nothing to contribute to it. He'd sit there with his coffee, telling me about these grand plans to start his own business. Once I get it up and running, Lauren, you'll see. I'll make sure you don't have to work so hard anymore. It sounded great in theory, but there was zero follow-through. He didn't even have a business plan. It was all talk. Okay. At first, I tried to be understanding of Greg quitting his job. Everyone hits rough patches, right? But I wasn't expecting his rough patch to turn into a full-on freeloading lifestyle. But weeks turned into months, and the man did absolutely nothing. I'd come home from 12-hour days at the bakery to find him sprawled out on the couch, eating chips and watching reruns of old cop shows. He didn't even bother to change out of his sweats most days. Meanwhile, the groceries he promised to pick up tomorrow were still not bought. The sink was full of dishes, and the trash was overflowing. "Hey, Greg," I'd ask, trying not to sound too annoyed. "Did you send out any job applications today?" "Not yet," he'd say, eyes glued to the TV. "I'm still working on my portfolio. You know, for the freelance gigs I'm planning." Oh, the freelance gigs. Let me tell you about those. Apparently, Greg's big plan was to start some kind of home renovation consulting business. He talked a lot about pivoting his skills and being his own boss. Sounds impressive, right? Except he never actually took any steps toward making it happen. No website, No business cards, no marketing, nothing. One time, I even offered to help him set up an Instagram account to showcase his work. I thought maybe if he had a platform, he could attract clients. But he just shrugged and said, "I'll get to it later. Social media is not my thing." Like, dude, it's 2023. If you're trying to start a business, you need some kind of online presence. While Greg was busy planning his imaginary empire, I was footing the bill for literally everything. Mortgage, Mr. Utilities, Mr. Groceries, you guessed it, me. Chloe's school expenses, oh yeah, also me. And let's not forget Greg's little hobbies. He started getting into woodworking as a stress reliever, which meant I was buying him expensive tools and supplies that sat untouched in the garage. One day, I came home from the bakery and found a $400 saw sitting in the living room. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. "Oh, that's for my new project," Greg said, not even looking up from his laptop. "I'm going to build a custom coffee table for the living room." "Greg, we already have a coffee table," I pointed out. "Yeah, but it's not personal, you know? I want something that represents us." The coffee table never got built. The saw stayed in the box for weeks, until I eventually shoved it into the garage to get it out of sight. Meanwhile, Chloe was catching on to her dad's vibe and started acting like the world owed her too. Every time she wanted something, she'd just assume I'd buy it for her. She didn't even bother asking Greg because, let's be real, he was just as broke as she was. "Lauren," she said one evening, sliding her laptop across the table toward me, "I need this jacket for school. It's for the senior trip." The jacket was $250. A jacket for one trip. "Chloe, that's really expensive," I said. "Can't we find something similar that's a little cheaper?" She rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might fall out of her head. "It's mandatory," she said, like I was being unreasonable. "Everyone else is getting one." Before I could say anything, Greg chimed in from the couch. "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's not that big of a deal." Like an idiot, I caved. I swiped my card, told myself it wasn't worth the argument, and tried to move on. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Chloe started treating me like her personal ATM. Need money for a field trip? Ask Lauren. Want the newest iPhone? Lauren will pay for it. She didn't even say thank you most of the time. It was just expected. One day I overheard her talking to one of her friends on the phone. "Yeah, my stepmom's loaded," she said, laughing. "She doesn't even care how much stuff costs." I just stood there, stunned. Is that what she thought? That I didn't care? That I was just some endless source of money? Greg wasn't any better. He started making these little comments that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, if I ever complained about how busy I was at the bakery, he'd say, "Well, at least you're making good money." Or if I brought up the bills, he'd go, "You're doing fine, Lauren. Why stress about it?" Why stress? Because I was paying for 3 people on one income, Greg. That's why. One night, after a particularly long day, I decided to sit Greg down for a serious talk. "Listen," I said, "I'm happy to help while you're figuring things out, but this can't go on forever. You need to start contributing, Greg. We're supposed to be a team." He looked at me like I'd just told him to walk to Mars. "I am contributing," he said. "I help around the house, don't I? I take care of Chloe." "Greg," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Helping around the house isn't the same as paying bills. And Chloe's almost 18. She doesn't need a babysitter." He sighed like he was the one being inconvenienced. "Lauren, I just need more time. You've got the bakery. It's not like we're struggling." That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a provider, someone who would keep everything running while he coasted through life. I decided to give him one last chance. "Okay," I said, "but you need to have a concrete plan by the end of the month. No more excuses." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. And surprise, the end of the month came and went with no plan, no job, and no change. I started feeling trapped, like I was carrying the weight of the entire household on my back while Greg and Chloe just sat there, taking advantage of me. I loved my bakery, but it felt like all the joy was being sucked out of my life because I was working so hard to support 2 people who didn't appreciate me. When I look back, I should have put my foot down sooner. But at the time, I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that Greg would snap out of it, that Chloe would grow up and start acting responsibly. I wanted so badly for us to be a happy family that I ignored all the signs that it wasn't working. But things were about to get a whole lot worse. By the time Chloe's 18th birthday rolled around, I was so desperate to keep the peace in our house that I didn't even realize how much I was bending over backward for people who didn't give a damn about me. Chloe had been dropping hints for months about how her birthday needed to be epic because it was the big one. You know, turning 18 and all. She wanted it to be the kind of party her friends would talk about for weeks. "Lauren, can we have the party at the bakery?" she asked one evening while scrolling on her phone. It's like super cool, and my friends are always saying how classy it looks. Classy? Sure, but classy doesn't come cheap. I hesitated for a moment, knowing full well this would cost me more than I was comfortable spending. Before I could even answer, Greg chimed in, "Come on, Lauren. It's her big day. Let's make it special." This man, who still hadn't lifted a finger to contribute financially, was pushing me to throw an extravagant party? But like a sucker, I agreed. I told myself it was for Chloe, not Greg, and that maybe this would help us bond more. Big mistake. I went all out for the party. I closed the bakery for the evening, hired a local band to play live music, and ordered these gorgeous custom cupcakes with edible gold accents. I even let Chloe pick out the decorations, which included some ridiculous balloon arch that cost nearly $500. But hey, I wanted her to feel special. In the days leading up to the party, Chloe was buzzing with excitement. She kept talking about how her friends were going to love it and how it was going to be the best night ever. I asked her for a guest list so I could plan accordingly, but she kept brushing me off. "Don't worry about it, Lauren," she'd say. "It's just a small group of friends." I should have known better. The night of the party, I showed up early to make sure everything was perfect. The bakery looked stunning, and I was actually kind of proud of what I'd pulled off. Chloe arrived about an hour later, dressed to the nines in a designer dress I had bought her. She looked amazing, and I could tell she felt like a queen. Her friends started trickling in, and soon the place was packed, not just with her classmates, but also with random people I'd never even heard of. It was chaos. Kids were running around, snapping selfies, and blasting music louder than I was comfortable with. But Chloe looked happy, and I figured that was the point. Then, just as I was starting to relax, she walked in. Nina, Chloe's mom. I knew it was her the second I saw her. She had this air of entitlement, like she owned the place. She was wearing this gaudy outfit that didn't match the vibe of the party at all, and her lipstick was smeared like she hadn't checked a mirror all night. She walked right up to Chloe, arms wide open, and yelled, "There's my baby girl!" Chloe froze for a second, glancing nervously at me, but then she hugged her mom like nothing was wrong. "Mom, you made it," she said, smiling. Made it? I hadn't invited her. I didn't even know Chloe had invited her. But there she was, acting like she belonged. I tried to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. I walked over to Greg, who was standing in the corner sipping a soda like he was a guest at someone else's party. "Greg," I said quietly, "did you know Nina was coming?" He looked at me like I'd just asked him if the sky was blue. "Of course I did," he said. "Chloe told me she wanted her mom here. I didn't think it'd be a big deal." Not a big deal? The woman hadn't shown up sober to a single event in years, and now she was at my bakery, crashing a party I paid for? I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. I tried to avoid Nina, but she made that impossible. She was everywhere, hugging Chloe, chatting with her friends, and loudly telling stories about how she used to throw parties just like this when Chloe was a kid. It was infuriating. Then, as if she hadn't already made her presence loud enough, she walked up to my table where I was sitting with Greg and Chloe and said, "This is my spot. Move." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Excuse me?" I replied. "This is my daughter's party," she snapped. "I'm her mother. I should be sitting next to her, not you." I looked at Greg, hoping he'd step in, but as usual, he just stared at his drink like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Chloe, who was sitting next to us, didn't say a word either. She just looked down at her phone, pretending not to notice. "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "There are plenty of empty seats. Feel free to pick one." Nina's face turned red. "Oh, look at you," she sneered. "The big bad stepmom who thinks she can replace me. Guess what? Money can't buy love." Before I could respond, she grabbed a plate of food off the table and hurled it onto the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, and everyone stopped talking. It was dead silent. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're not welcome here." Nina laughed like I'd told a joke. "Oh, you think you can kick me out? You're nothing, Lauren. Nothing." I signaled to the bakery's security staff. Yes, I had security, because I wasn't stupid enough to think a party full of teenagers wouldn't need supervision. They escorted Nina out while she screamed and caused a scene in front of all the guests. Chloe looked mortified. And Greg? He still didn't say a damn word. After Nina was gone, the party felt tense. Chloe tried to play it off, but you could tell her friends were uncomfortable. The whispers started. "Did you see her mom? I can't believe that just happened." People left early, and Chloe barely spoke to me for the rest of the night. When we got home, I tried to talk to her. "Chloe, I'm sorry about what happened tonight, but..." She cut me off. "This wouldn't have happened if you just let her sit with us. You made it worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done to make her birthday special, she was blaming me for her mom's behavior? I looked at Greg, hoping for backup, but he just muttered, "Let's talk about this tomorrow." After the disaster that was Chloe's birthday, you'd think Greg might have stepped up and at least tried to show some appreciation or support. Nope. Instead, he doubled down on being the most entitled, lazy, and delusional person I've ever met. By this point, I wasn't even angry. I was just exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, financially, exhausted. Things hit a new low when Greg decided he was going to help out by taking over some of the household chores. At first, I thought, finally, he's doing something. But of course, it didn't last. For about a week, he'd occasionally do the dishes or vacuum the living room, but then he started complaining about how draining it was. "This is a lot of work," he said one evening, as he tossed a load of laundry onto the couch. "I don't know how you expect me to do all this and focus on my business." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Greg, I've been doing all of this and running a business for years." "What are you talking about?" He shrugged. "Yeah, but you're used to it. This is new for me." I couldn't even respond. What was there to say? The man was allergic to responsibility, and then there was Chloe. If Greg was a freeloading mooch, Chloe was quickly becoming his protege. She'd picked up on his attitude and ran with it. She wasn't just asking for things anymore, she was demanding them. One evening, she came downstairs and announced that she needed new furniture for her room. Not just a desk or a chair, she wanted a full makeover. New bed, new dresser, new everything. "I've outgrown all my old stuff," she said, flipping her hair like she was a Kardashian. "I need something more mature." "Chloe, we can't afford that right now," I said firmly. "Maybe we can look at updating a few things next year." Her face turned red. "You just don't want to spend money on me because I'm not your kid," she snapped. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been doing my best for this girl, and she had the nerve to say I didn't care about her because she wasn't my biological daughter. I didn't even know how to respond. Greg, of course, didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at his phone like nothing was happening. That night, I sat down with Greg and laid it all out. "You need to get a job," I said bluntly. "I don't care what it is, but you can't just sit here and expect me to do everything. It's not fair." Greg didn't take it well. "You're being selfish," he said, crossing his arms. "You don't understand how hard it is for me right now." I laughed. An actual laugh, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Hard for you? Greg, I'm the one working 12-hour days while you sit on your ass. How is that fair?" He just shook his head. "You don't get it, Lauren. You've always been about the money. You don't care about my dreams." That was it. That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank account. Greg's true colors were in full view, and I knew things weren't going to get better. But little did I know, Chloe was about to up the stakes and push me to my breaking point. Chloe's graduation was the grand finale. By this point, I was so worn down by Greg and Chloe's entitlement that I could barely muster the energy to argue anymore. I'd become the human version of sure whatever, just going along with things to avoid yet another blow-up. But let me tell you, this one took the cake. It started a couple of weeks before Chloe's graduation ceremony. She came home one day, full of excitement, waving a letter from her school. "They're giving me an award at graduation," she announced, practically skipping into the kitchen. "That's great, Chloe," I said, genuinely happy for her. "What's the award for? Something about leadership or community service?" "I don't know," she shrugged, already texting someone on her phone. "But the important thing is, I get to go on stage." I smiled and congratulated her, even though it bugged me a little that she didn't even know what the award was for. Still, I figured this was a proud moment for her, and I wanted to support her. What I didn't realize was how quickly things were about to spiral out of control. The first sign of trouble came when Chloe announced that she wanted to have a big graduation party at the house. "We'll keep it simple," she said, which I now know is Chloe speak for start prepping your wallet. When I asked her how many people she wanted to invite, she casually said, "Oh, like 50, maybe 60. "Chloe, 60 people?" I said, my eyes practically popping out of my head. "Where are we even going to fit that many people?" "We'll do it in the backyard," she replied, like it was no big deal. "Just rent some tables and chairs, and maybe a tent. It'll be fine." Fine? I was still recovering from the disaster of her birthday party, and now she wanted me to host an even bigger event? I glanced at Greg, hoping he'd step in and suggest something more reasonable. Of course, he didn't. "She's only graduating once," he said with a shrug. "We should make it special." I gritted my teeth but agreed to the party. As the graduation ceremony got closer, Chloe's demands started piling up. She needed a new dress for the event. "Nothing cheap, Lauren? This is a big deal." New shoes to match the dress, professional hair and makeup, and of course, a custom cake for the party. By the time I finished paying for everything, I was out hundreds of dollars. Not once did Greg or Chloe even offer to chip in. On the morning of the ceremony, Chloe came downstairs wearing her brand new dress, looking like $1,000,000. She glanced at me and said, "Don't forget to bring flowers for after the ceremony. It'll look weird if I don't get any." It'll look weird? Not, "Hey Lauren, could you please bring flowers?" No, it was just expected that I'd show up with a bouquet like some personal assistant. I bit my tongue, grabbed my keys, and ran out to pick up flowers before we headed to the school. By the time we got there, I was already exhausted, but I plastered on a smile and tried to focus on Chloe's big moment. The ceremony itself was fine. Chloe got her award, walked across the stage, and beamed at the applause. For a split second, I thought, okay, maybe this will be worth it. Maybe she'll realize how much I care and start treating me better. After the ceremony, we met her outside to take pictures. Greg handed her the bouquet I'd bought, taking all the credit, of course. "Your stepmom picked these up," he said, like it was some minor afterthought. Chloe barely glanced at me. "Oh, thanks, I guess." Thanks, I guess? I'd been running myself ragged to make this day perfect for her, and all I got was a half-hearted thanks? I swallowed my frustration and smiled for the pictures, but inside I was fuming. The real drama started at the graduation party. I'd spent all day setting up the backyard, arranging tables, hanging decorations, and making sure the food was perfect. By the time the guests started arriving, I was running on fumes. Chloe, on the other hand, was in full party mode, laughing with her friends and posing for pictures like a celebrity. Greg, as usual, was nowhere to be found, probably hiding inside, scrolling on his phone. About an hour into the party, Chloe came up to me and said, "Mom's coming over." I froze. "What do you mean, Mom's coming over?" "She wants to congratulate me," Chloe said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I told her to stop by. "Chloe," I said, trying to stay calm, "after what happened at your birthday, I don't think it's a good idea for Nina to come here." Chloe rolled her eyes. "That was your fault, Lauren. If you hadn't been so rude to her, none of that would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Chloe, she caused a scene, insulted me, and destroyed property. How is that my fault?" "You just don't get it," Chloe snapped. "She's my real mom, and she's part of my life whether you like it or not." I turned to Greg, hoping he'd back me up. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Let's not make a big deal out of this. It's her day." I'd spent weeks planning this party, paid for every single thing, and now I was supposed to let his ex-wife waltz in and ruin it? Absolutely not. "Nina is not coming into this house," I said firmly. End of discussion. That was all Chloe needed to lose it. "You're not my mom!" she screamed, loud enough for the entire party to hear. "You're nobody! Who do you think you are, telling me what to do?" The party went dead silent. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting to see how I'd react. Greg just stood there, staring at the ground like a coward. "I'm the person who paid for this entire party," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm the person who's been supporting you for years, while your father sits on his ass. And if you can't respect me in my own home, you can leave." Chloe's face turned red with anger. "Fine! I don't want to be here anyway!" She stormed off, dragging a group of her friends with her. The rest of the party fizzled out after that. Guests made awkward excuses and left, leaving me alone in a backyard full of half-eaten food and overturned chairs. Greg finally came outside, but instead of apologizing, he blamed me. "You didn't have to escalate things," he said. "You could have just let her have this one day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Greg, she humiliated me in front of everyone and you did nothing." Again, he shook his head and walked back inside, leaving me to clean up the mess. A few weeks after Chloe's graduation fiasco, things in the house were tense, to say the least. Chloe barely spoke to me, which honestly was a bit of a relief. When she did, it was usually to complain or throw in a passive-aggressive comment about how I ruined her party. Greg wasn't much better. If he wasn't completely ignoring me, he was muttering things under his breath about how I needed to be more understanding. But the real storm hit when Chloe got the letter she'd been waiting for, her acceptance to NYU. She came bursting into the house one afternoon, waving the envelope around like she'd just won the lottery. "Lauren, Dad, I got in!" she screamed, practically jumping up and down. "That's great news," I said, genuinely happy for her. I figured, after all the drama, maybe this could be a turning point. Maybe she'd start taking responsibility and working toward her future. Silly me. Greg hugged her, grinning like a proud father. "I knew you could do it, kiddo." Chloe turned to me with that all-too-familiar smirk. "So, Lauren, when can we talk about tuition?" The room went quiet. I blinked at her, caught off guard. "Tuition?" I asked. "Chloe, NYU is expensive. Have you looked into scholarships or financial aid?" She rolled her eyes. "I got some aid, but it's not enough. I figured you'd help cover the rest? I mean, you've got the money." I looked at Greg, expecting him to step in and explain how college expenses weren't just my responsibility. Instead, he nodded like it was already a done deal. She's right, Lauren. You can afford it. That was the moment I realized they'd been planning this behind my back. Greg had probably been feeding her the idea that I'd just opened my wallet, no questions asked, like I always did. But this? Paying tens of thousands of dollars for a kid who had spent the last year treating me like garbage? No way. Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm really proud of you for getting into NYU, but I can't just write a blank check for your tuition. Have you considered getting a part-time job or looking into more scholarships? Her face turned red. A job? Are you serious? How am I supposed to focus on school if I'm working all the time? Plenty of students work while they're in college, I replied. It's a good way to build responsibility. Greg cut in before she could respond. Lauren, come on, she's just a kid. You don't want her to struggle, do you? A kid? I shot back. She's 18. And let's be real, Greg. She's old enough to know better than to expect me to cover this without even asking. Chloe crossed her arms and glared at me. You're just trying to punish me because of the graduation party. I stared at her, stunned. Punish you? Chloe, this has nothing to do with the party. This is about money. And the fact that you and your dad seem to think I'm a bottomless ATM? Greg threw up his hands. Oh, here we go again. Everything's about money with you, Lauren. Life isn't fair, Chloe muttered under her breath. I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. You're right, Chloe. Life isn't fair. But that doesn't mean you get to dump all your responsibilities on me. If you want to go to NYU, you need to figure out how to make it happen. The conversation didn't end there, of course. Chloe stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Greg sat on the couch, sulking like a teenager. For the next few days, the house was a war zone. Chloe wouldn't even look at me, and Greg kept dropping passive-aggressive comments about how I was letting the family down. One night, Greg finally decided to confront me. You're being selfish, Lauren, he said, standing in the kitchen while I washed dishes. This is her future we're talking about. I turned to face him, my hands still wet. Greg, don't you dare call me selfish. I'm just realistic. She's your stepdaughter, he said, like that was supposed to mean something. You're supposed to support her. She's only my stepdaughter when it's convenient for you, I shot back. Every other time I'm just Lauren, the woman who's not her real mom. Well, not anymore. Greg looked at me like I just slapped him. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. I'm done being taken for granted. If Chloe wants to go to NYU, she can figure it out with her real mom. The next day, Chloe came downstairs with a new tactic, guilt. She sat at the table, looking teary-eyed, and said, Lauren, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to make you feel unappreciated. For a split second, I almost believed her. But then she added, I just think it's really unfair that you won't help me. You've always said you wanted to give me a better future. Isn't this part of that? I sighed, sitting down across from her. Chloe, I do want you to have a good future, but I also want you to learn how to take responsibility for yourself. Life isn't about expecting other people to bail you out. She sniffled dramatically, clearly trying to turn on the waterwork. I can't believe you do this to me. You're ruining my chances at New York University. No, Chloe, I said firmly. You're ruining them by refusing to take any responsibility. You've spent months treating me like I don't matter, and now you expect me to pay for your tuition? That's not how it works. A few days later, Greg tried one last time to pressure me. Either you pay for Chloe's education, he said, his arms crossed like he was delivering an ultimatum, or I'm filing for divorce. I stared at him, completely unfazed. Okay, I said. File for divorce. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You don't mean that. Oh, I mean it, I said, crossing my own arms. In fact, I'll call a lawyer tomorrow. For the first time in months, Greg was speechless. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, while I sat there feeling oddly calm. When Greg and Chloe left, I thought I'd feel a little guilty. But as I watched them pack up their things and walk out the door, the only thing I felt was relief. For the first time in years, my house was quiet, peaceful. Greg didn't make a big scene when he left, which honestly surprised me. I think he realized his usual guilt trips weren't going to work anymore. He muttered something about how I'd regret this. Chloe, on the other hand, made sure I knew exactly how she felt. This is why no one likes you, she snapped as she hauled a suitcase down the stairs. You're selfish and controlling, and you'll end up alone. I didn't even bother responding. What was the point? She'd already made it clear how little she respected me, and I wasn't about to waste my breath trying to change her mind. Instead, I stood in the doorway and watched as they loaded their stuff into Greg's car. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the prenup I'd insisted on. Greg tried to contest it, claiming he deserved a share of the bakery. My lawyer shut that down fast. I heard bits and pieces about them through mutual friends. Apparently, they were living in a tiny apartment across town. Greg was trying to restart his contracting business, but it wasn't going well. He'd burned a lot of bridges in the industry, and word had gotten around about his poor work ethic. Chloe, meanwhile, had deferred her enrollment at NYU because she couldn't afford the tuition. She was working at a mall, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfair her life was. One day, I got a message from Chloe. It was short and clearly written in a hurry. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. A part of me wanted to believe she'd finally realized how unfair she'd been, but another part of me knew better. Chloe wasn't reaching out because she cared. She was reaching out because she needed something. Money, most likely. I decided not to respond. I wasn't interested in reopening that door. A few weeks later, Greg tried his luck. He called me one evening while I was at the bakery, working on plans for the grand opening of the second location. "Hey, Lauren," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I almost laughed. "What do you want, Greg?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. There was a long pause before he finally admitted why he was calling. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to help Chloe out. She's really struggling right now, and I know you care about her deep down." I felt my blood boil. "Greg, let me make this clear. Chloe is not my responsibility. I'm done. If she's struggling, that's on you. And her." He tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, hanging up before he could say another word. That was the last time I heard from them. And here, my story ends. Thanks for reading, Redditors. And remember, never let anyone take advantage of your kindness. You deserve better.